Pat Mike Cohn, president of the Republican Club of Laguna Woods, and I'm here today on our show Light on America with our VP of Programs, Ro Kendall, and our guest speaker today, who Ro will introduce in just a moment. We strive to give you truthful facts and information you may not have or have access to. And we strive to dispel misinformation and disinformation surrounding narratives that can be very misleading. Our topic today will be on our Second Amendment of the Constitution. We are aware that there are many voices and factions calling for gun control. However, many of these narratives are simply based on the ignorance of our Second Amendment and firearms. So with that said, I'm going to hand you over to Ro Kendall, who will introduce our guest speaker on this topic.
Thank you, Pat. Our guest today is Greg Boslog, and he is the owner of Orange County's premier indoor shooting range, and it's called On Target, and it's located in Laguna Niguel. The range boasts a 5-star customer service rating because it's just that great. And Greg has over 50 years experience with firearms, so he's the one we want to talk to here. Many of today's gun control narratives are simply based on ignorance of firearms, and the mainstream media's disinformation, which is trying to convince people to vote away their freedom and their Second Amendment rights. Today, Greg will share some facts and figures and enlighten us about these very important rights. And he's also going to address some key points and myths regarding gun control and our rights. So here again, I will introduce Greg. So Greg, tell us, what is the Second Amendment?
Second Amendment was invented, if you will, because nothing like it previously ever existed. It just wasn't around. It was created by some great people, Hamilton, Madison. These individuals took input from people, the citizens who had just finished fighting a war for freedoms, and these were the kind of freedoms that were denied. You have the Second Amendment means that we, the people, can keep our firearms to keep the government in check. The people are the only way to stop the government from making us slaves, or making us, if you will, individuals who are subject to their whims and wills, unlimited taxes, unlimited impositions on your ability to just be a family, to love one another. And that's what the Second Amendment does. But then it also turns around and supports and maintains the First Amendment. That very important amendment that, because of what the English did to us, you weren't allowed to have the gathering, freedom to gather. You weren't allowed to write in papers, the press, anything, unless it was approved by either a local magistrate or a governor. So those were and you can imagine, you weren't allowed to get together. If 10 of you wanted, we wouldn't be allowed to be here if they didn't want us to. Wow. So it's very important that people understand the First Amendment is guaranteed by the Second Amendment. The Third, the Fourth, and the Fifth Amendment, all of the amendments are held up because the people are empowered by I'm going to call it God-given right, because the framers of the Constitution invoked God in all of their meetings and all of their subject matter. They talked about the will of God, being supportive of God. They started with prayer. They ended with prayer. So this was a right truly inspired to these individuals. And the Second Amendment is key.
Yes.
And yes, with my background in firearms, I'm kind of, yes, involved in Second Amendment, much more than I ever planned. Much more. I've always supported it, yes, but I've supported the First Amendment too. And that's why I'm here.
Yes, yes. We're so glad you're here.
Yes. There was something about the Concord that is connected with this.
And
tell us.
Those of you who have, look it up. The history is that Concord was the first time the American citizen, and they were not citizens, you got to remember they were subjects of the British Crown, where they first exercised their right, because the British left Boston area and went to Concord to seize the guns, the ammunition, powder, shot and ball it's called, to seize it. And at Concord, the first shot for freedom was fired. A shot heard round the world, it's called. And that shot is where we are today. It was one individual, two individuals, people died that day, but the British lost America on that day for the reason of trying to take the guns away from the citizens. And the militia were nothing more than a group of people, farmers, citizen owners, shop owners, who got together with their firearms and drove the British back to Boston.
Courageous souls.
Yeah, and because of that, we have the Second Amendment and the First Amendment and the Third Amendment and the Fourth and the 14th Amendment. We have all of that because of that, the Concord, the shot heard around the world.
Wow.
And people forget that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do.
They really do. So,
And I expect that nowadays our children aren't even taught about the shot heard round the world. So we of our generation still remember that, and this really clarifies what that means.
I have grandchildren who are in school. And of course, my children, I taught them that. They didn't necessarily get that from their school, but I made sure they were taught. I look at the books and the things that my grandchildren are being taught, and what they're learning from public school is disheartening, because they don't even, there's teenagers that I know that can't even balance a checkbook. They have no idea what money is. They get this little plastic card, and that's how they operate. You can imagine these people, these young people have been denied their right to know how their freedom was paid for, why the Bill of Rights exists, why the First, the Second, all of them exist,
Yes.
especially the Second. It's a limited number, and because of that, it's again, it's just disheartening. Our children, our grandchildren are being robbed.
Strategically, I think.
Yes.
I mean, so we talked about why the First Amendment is important. It protects the first and all the others. So why did they? Why is it so vital now that we protect the First Amendment, the Second Amendment in our county, in our nation? Maybe you can speak to that, Greg.
Yeah, this is, and I think the people have seen. Hopefully, there's people that have seen and understand that the last couple of years we've been seriously lied to. The First Amendment, our rights for freedom of information, our rights to speak freely were denied. Overtly, the government was involved to make sure that the truths that were trying to come out were basically subject to, I don't know how to say it nicely, but basically we got ripped off.
That's good.
We were not told the truth. We were lied to repeatedly. And they were even lying now about how much they were able to withhold the truth. The only reason that they haven't taken us and subjected us more is because the Second Amendment is there. They realize that, and there is a great quote that's out there that Webster put it out, Noah Webster, the dictionary, Webster, put it out, which said, as long as the free people are armed, the government cannot take their freedom.
Right.
The government cannot supersede your rights if the people can defend their rights. That's difficult for people to understand and believe, but it's the truth. And we are the only country, at the time Webster said this in 1786, we were the only country in the world where the people had the right for freedom to have firearms of any kind. There were no restrictions, firearms of any kind to defend our rights. In Europe, England, Europe, nowhere else was that allowed.
Is that still the case, or has that changed?
That is pretty much the case right now.
Still.
And unfortunately, people will point to England as saying, look, they don't have guns. They have a murder rate that they don't report. But they even, 2 years ago, I think they were going to outlaw certain size knives because they were
Yeah.
being used to kill people.
Yeah, they have a lot
So
of
they
knife
outlawed
attacks.
guns. That didn't work because now they have knives. People point out Australia. Oh, well, they took all the guns. The assault rate in Australia quadrupled. Look, if you look at the numbers, the rate of murder and so forth went down and then went back up as they substituted knives and clubs for guns.
Wow.
And the assault rate went up, rate went up because people couldn't defend themselves. That it's just, we must have the right to say what we need to say when we need to say it, and we must have the right to defend that. And that's the Second Amendment,
Yes.
all of the time.
We don't want to go back to being subjects.
Never. I mean, we're
Never.
subject now to unreasonable things, and it ought not to be, but we have a court system that quite frankly is favorable to the Constitution. There are people who say, oh, they hate the Supreme Court because, they're constitutionalist. I want that. I want that judge. I want that clerk. I want that federal judge, the Supreme Court judge, the municipal judge, to look at the Constitution and say, you have a right.
Yes.
I'm giving you that right. I'm maintaining that right. My ruling is within that right.
Yes.
And
And
that's
we don't
hard
want
to
it
do.
interpreted. We want it stated in fact.
Right. People say, oh, let's rewrite the Constitution. Let's start with the Second Amendment.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that means you want to deny me my right to defend myself. And that right now is unconstitutional. I don't deny you your right to own whatever car you want. I don't deny you your right to live wherever you want, except my backyard. But I don't want to deny you any right.
Right.
We should all live within the Constitution. And,
Yes.
and so that's hard to do. It's hard to get people to not be, we've talked briefly about
Yes.
people tend to have a bias when they
Yes.
start something.
Uh-huh.
I have a bias. You have a bias. I make it clear what my bias is. I don't assume you're a bad person. I don't assume you're a good person. I watch what you do. I listen to what you say, and then I'm going to render a real judgment. Some people automatically, some people will judge that because Greg owns On Target, they automatically hate me because I own a gun. Does that make me a bad person? No. Actually, I'm probably your best friend because
Yes.
I will defend your rights,
Yes.
all of them. And,
Yes.
and that's the best friend you can have is someone
Yes.
who will not ask you for anything, but will support you unconditionally. And I have some Marines that work for me, and they know that, and they say that.
Yes.
And they will and have fought for everybody
Yep.
and didn't ask for anything in return, but respect for what they did.
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm at with the Second Amendment. It's too important to lose.
Vital.
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 And we talked about, and we had the questions like numbers.
The numbers, yeah.
The numbers. People will say, oh, well, and we've talked about these numbers. 38,000 people died by guns I'm going to go to 2021 because the CDC and the rest of the data is based on that. They haven't fully released all the 2022 data yet.
Okay.
They run about a year and a half, year and a quarter behind.
Takes time.
But the 2021 data, there was some 38,000. And it sounds like a terrible number, but it's like anything else, you need to get in and understand the number. I had a statistics professor in college, and he said, what do you want to prove? I can prove it for you because I can game the numbers. I can make it look as if the worst thing in the world is X or Y.
Right.
And so because of that, and I teach this to everybody, look at the numbers. And the number says that 38,000 people, and it's a round-up number, 54% of those were actually suicides by guns.
Right.
In addition to that, an additional roughly 4,000 or so were what they call youth. And I'm round numbers now. We have deaths by gangland shooting, deaths by murder of adults, deaths by police. We have all these different groups. The actual number, which it's disheartening, yes, very much.
Yes.
The actual number is that we have about 4,000 youth die, young people, children they call them. But unfortunately, they categorize the youth because the numbers from 0 to 17 weren't big enough and didn't justify having a concern, they added 18 and 19-year-olds. There isn't
Really?
a single state in the United States that considers an 18-year-old a child,
They're
much less a
categorized as adults
19-year-old.
now.
Yeah, we're
Yes.
talking 18 and 19-year-olds who drive an M1 tanks for the
Yes.
Marine Corps. I
Yeah,
mean, these aren't children.
Right.
But they couldn't get the numbers high enough because the 18 and 19-year-olds are 60% of the youth numbers. Drive-by shootings, murders, shoot one another, whatever it is. So you have to look at the number.
Yeah.
Children are dying by guns. It's unacceptable, but I understand that's what happens. Drive-bys, whatever. We have 14-year-olds shooting 14-year-olds in cities like Chicago and New York.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable. How do you stop that? You can't. You can do the best you can. Maybe count, maybe get involved with the youth earlier, all of those programs.
Family.
Family.
Yeah. And then to do the numbers for people, I looked at California. We're in California. How do
Yes.
we do? What have we done? And these numbers are from the CDC for 2021. We had 3,576 gun deaths in California. Half of those were suicides, which leaves us with roughly 1,931 people took their own life. I consider that unacceptable because the state needs to spend more money, put more money back into the mental health.
Mental health.
I'm big on
That's
that. Don't get me
yes,
started
yes,
on
Yes,
Yes.
we agree, totally agree.
that. Yeah, so we had 45 killed by guns in the state, 1,645. Unacceptable number. But at the same time, we had 10,901 die from fentanyl.
Right.
Much
And
greater.
that to me is, quit looking at the guns because
Yeah.
that's not a problem. We need to look at the drug problem. Our sheriff has been saying it. He's been in Sacramento 100 times saying, let's go after the drugs. I'll do what I can for the Second Amendment to keep our rights because the drug problem is driving the crime problem.
Yes.
Of course.
It's unfortunate here in Orange County because it's day after day, it's a drug issue. People have to protect themselves from people with drugs. And that's all we can do. We can just try, keep the Second Amendment alive, protect yourselves, but then instead of spending the time and the money about the guns, let's go spend the money mental health. Let's go
Yes.
spend the money
Yes.
for programs to stop fentanyl and the rest of
Yes.
this because
Yes.
it's just not acceptable to me. But
I don't
you
think
know, and I'm glad we're here and
Yes.
take off on this because I think your viewers need to know that within their county, their efforts need to be focused on a couple of key things, and one of them is not guns. It's not guns.
I know that our Republican Assemblywoman Diane Dixon's big on that. Young Kim has been, Janet Nguyen, they have been really fighting this hard.
Yes.
But we don't have a majority in Sacramento,
No.
as we know. So
Yeah.
that's our uphill battle.
Yeah, and they'd like to push away, they go after the Second Amendment, they go after guns. Why? Because of Hollywood. When I teach classes and I take your front door or one of your bedroom doors and we take sections of it, we put it up, and it shows people in Hollywood hiding behind a door like as if it's an imaginary barrier of some kind. And we take the most common bullet and shoot it through the door, and it goes blip, blip, right through the door. Whoever's behind it gets hit. Because of Hollywood. They've demonized, whateverized firearms into something that they're not, okay? They're just a tool.
So you're not safe standing behind a door.
No, you're not, and there's some
Absolutely.
firearms that you're not safe in your
Yeah.
house. It'll just go right
Yeah.
on through. And they don't show that. They don't show reality. They show more misuse. They show the gangs. Everybody's got a gun.
And they're not going to follow the law anyway.
No,
So it's
no.
the law-abiding people that want to protect themselves and their families that are going to get knocked out of the box, and the bad guys will still have guns. So
Always.
it makes no sense.
Always. And it's been one of the biggest issues with the law enforcement people that I deal with is how do the bad guys get their guns? They talk about ghost guns, where they make their guns. Well, the guns that they make are actually purchased legally, and then they modify stuff. So they make it illegal. The guys doing that are breaking the law. So instead of saying that's the law being broken and prosecute that, they want to penalize you, me, anybody else that's a legal gun owner. We get penalized because they don't stop the bad guys. They just don't go after the bad guys. There's not enough incentive to do that. And there's a lot of money in crooked guns. And where there's money, there's always crime.
Yes.
And that's what makes it, they say, oh, well, the Second Amendment, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have that problem. That's a lie, because every single country that has banned guns has a gun problem, because people will find guns, the criminals, and they will use those guns.
Yes. Greg, can you segue into gun-free zones? Maybe this is a good time to talk about gun-free zones. And
gun-free zones are a myth. It's basically saying that I put up a sign, and because of that sign, you're not going to carry a gun. Here locally, last year, there was a gentleman that I met a few times who was killed by a gun, who went into a church during a service, and it was a gun-free zone. And the person that got killed, Master Kim, because he was shot and killed by the guy that he took down. And that, he obeyed the law. He did not bring his gun, he's licensed concealed carry. He did not bring his gun into the church. And the bad guy came into church, chained the doors shut, carrying a gun, and in the tussle, shot Master Kim. He was a master martial artist, a firearm instructor.
Yes.
Is that what happened here in our community at the Lutheran?
Geneva.
Which one was it? Presbyterian.
Geneva Presbyterian.
Yes.
Yeah, Presbyterian.
Yes.
And he was there with some relatives and stuff, and he was a friend. And so we lost a good man because of a gun-free zone.
Yes. There's a lot of fear about guns, and I understand that. I myself was fearful at one time until I actually learned to use a gun after the Watts riots years ago. We wanted to have our children be aware of how to use a gun and protect themselves. So fear is a big driver, isn't it? And misunderstanding, what a firearm is, and keeping it safe. And that's why, when we first talked with you, we were thrilled to go down to On Target and look at your facility and see where all these people who, like me, are probably fearful, can go in there and dispel the fear they have or learn to overcome it and feel safer.
Absolutely. We even created a group, because the majority of the people who hate guns are women. I'm being sexist, I admit it, are female. We created a group a number of years ago. We call it the Better Half Gun Club.
The Better Half Gun Club.
And it's mostly women. Husbands are invited. Husbands are disinvited by their wives. But they're invited. And in that time, we've had people who, young women who are early 20s, 18, 19, 20, have never fired a gun, come in as an invite, and we invite everybody. Please come in. We're happy to have you. It's a very loving, caring relationship. I hired women specifically to train women because of the techniques used and the care and the empathy.
Yes, yes.
And we had a woman we have windows you can look out on the range, stood there at the windows crying, scared to death because she'd heard guns were bad and everything was bad. At this point in time, she's got 4 guns and has taken advanced classes and doing just fine.
And much more confident.
Yes.
Going from fearful to
she's
confident.
really, really good. And then we had our Vivian, who was our matriarch, if you will, of the group. She came down there when she was 94 years old. Said the last time she'd shot a gun was one time on her dad's farm back in the day. We didn't get a date. But she came in, I wanted to do it. It's on my bucket list, I want to do it. All right. So she came in, she did that, took classes. She ended up buying 3 guns.
94 years old.
At 94, by the time she finally had to quit coming for health reasons, and she moved to Northern California with her family. But she 94, it was her bucket list, and she was there every single week.
Wow. So she practiced. She built up her confidence. And got.
And
It's
I
never
invite,
too late.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
I
never too
invite
late.
everybody to do that.
Yeah.
Don't
Yes.
prejudge. Again, we
Yes.
started off with a conversation about we always judge you. Don't prejudge.
Right.
Until you physically try it or do it or see it, don't prejudge.
Excellent. You know, our time, believe it or not, our time is up for today. But folks, we have so much more to talk about. We want to talk more about more of the myths to help you understand those. We also want to talk about the threats to our Second Amendment. So we're going to have Greg back next month.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
But Greg, we're so grateful for your coming today. And as you see, facts matter, especially when certain parties use misleading storylines to try to take away our Second Amendment. And we just don't want that to happen. So until next time, we hope you've enjoyed our show, and we hope you'll be able to take away something beneficial into your day-to-day. So thank you. God bless.